Hey guys, Dr. Joel Miller here. We're talking about mold today. So this is mold part one. Primarily, we're talking about, do you have mold toxicity? So we're going to talk about, the things that you may be experiencing if you have mold toxicity. We'll talk about where you might find mold and what it might look like if you maybe had it in your house or something. And then we'll also talk about testing for mold toxicity and the options that are there. In part two, we're going to get into how to easily detox mold, specifically the mold spores, the mycotoxins. And then in part three, we're going to talk about killing mold, which may be necessary if you've had it chronically. So again, we'll get into that in parts two and three. So part one, here we go. So mold, what is it? So let's remember that mold is technically a fungus. Now, mold gives off these toxins called spores, and it's when we breathe in these spores, they're called mycotoxins. It's when we breathe them in that we can have all kinds of different issues, and it can just cause all kinds of different problems for us. So, before I go through kind of the list of signs and symptoms, it's important to remember that mold can be difficult to diagnose because each person and their symptoms when they have mold toxicity is usually a little bit different. One person might have extreme fatigue and depression. One person might have neurological symptoms, and another person might have unexplained weight gain. And so it can be a little bit tricky to diagnose in that way. But we're going to talk about all the things here. So signs and symptoms: extreme fatigue, chronic pain, brain fog / poor memory. I would say out of all of these symptoms, I'd say the extreme fatigue and then the brain fog, those are usually probably the most common ones. Abdominal pain or digestive issues, anxiety, irritability or rage, that goes back to your liver, right? The liver, if it's not able to detox mold well, you'll exhibit a lot of the anger emotions that are so often associated with the liver. Depression, if it eventually runs down your dopamine, serotonin, and things like that. Rashes and skin problems, if you have basically like leaky gut caused by the mold. Poor sleep, insomnia, unexplained weight gain, numbness or tingling. Basically, what we're looking at is any health issues that begin after moving into a new living place, starting at a new church, new office, or beginning at a new school. And let me clarify, I'm not talking about the building being new, I'm talking about you being new to the building. And so when you look back at your health history and you think, okay, I had all these issues start during this time, we always want to narrow down, okay, what was going on in that time? So many times I have patients that'll come in and we kind of narrow down through the history where their health issues came from. And maybe it was when they first started in a high school and the high school was really, really old. Maybe it was when they moved into to an old apartment, or maybe they moved to a new city and started going to a church that just was a really old church and may have had a lot of mold issues. So keep that in mind, because normally with mold toxicity, the exposure comes from somewhere. And so either it's going to be an old place, an old building, or somewhere that's had water damage that's not been cleaned up properly. So how to spot mold. So if you ever see these little yellow circles in the ceiling, okay, that's water damage. That's not good. If this is a place that you live, if it's your house, obviously you want to definitely look at getting that fixed and figuring out if there is still a leak and where it's coming from, and you want to make sure all of that is repaired properly. If that's in, we see those in a lot of like old buildings, a lot of government buildings, post offices. Sometimes we'll see them in a number of different stores, shopping stores that are just old buildings. So if that's something that you're seeing, that's, that indicates there's been water damage and there's likely mold growing somewhere close by there. The other one is pretty obvious. I mean, if you see these black spots on a wall, That's a fungus. That's mold growing on the wall, and that's usually going to be extremely toxic, and you definitely want to make sure to get that fixed. So as far as if you're shopping for a new house, you're shopping for, or you're looking for a new apartment, something along those lines, make sure to look for signs and symptoms of water damage. If you see that, make sure everything's been fixed properly to limit this risk of mold growing. So, how to diagnose mold toxicity? So we talked about kind of the signs and symptoms of mold toxicity, and so if you think you have it, how would you confirm that? How would you do that with testing? So we have two different options here. Number one is lab testing. And so we'll talk about that in a second. There's a really good test you can run that checks your blood and checks for mold toxicity. Then we have manual muscle testing. And so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. If you're familiar with manual muscle testing, then this will be a familiar topic. If you're not, then it'll be kind of new to you, which is fine as well. I did put a little asterisk here. I highly recommend when it comes to working with any kind of functional medicine practitioner, natural practitioner, whatever it may be, I highly recommend finding someone that's certified in systems healthcare. Okay, they're going to be extremely knowledgeable, and the technique that they're certified in, this is the technique that I'm certified in, they're going to be able to extremely specifically figure out these different issues for you. And so I'll talk about this a little bit more, I'm sure, in the future. So let's talk about the lab testing. So one of the great tests that I like to use from time to time is it's called the Mycotox Profile. This is from a company called Great Plains Laboratory. As you can see here, I'll zoom in a little bit. It's basically going to be checking the levels of mold, right? So there's a couple here that are fairly common, and this is not the whole lab. This is page one of multiple pages, I think 3 or 4. But we have aflatoxin M1, ochratoxin. Ochratoxin's probably the most common, but these other toxins are extremely important to check as well, and these are all under the Aspergillus kind of profile here. So gliotoxin, and then we have the different forms from the penicillium. So penicillium. So when we look at this lab test, there's a couple pros, couple cons here that we'll talk about. Number one, with the pros, it's an accurate test, gives you objective data, and then obviously it's going to check the level of toxicity. Are you a little bit toxic, or is it through the roof toxic? The cons of this test, it's not mentioned here, but obviously the price, right? So whenever you're doing a lab testing in the functional medicine world, it can get a little bit expensive. But when we talk about the cons, this test doesn't necessarily help you understand how to detox the mold spores or kill the mold fungal infection if present, right? So it doesn't necessarily check for that. Now, all in all, this test is incredible. And I strongly recommend that if you're wanting to get some lab testing done, getting some objective data for mold toxicity, this is the test that I would highly recommend. Now, one of the things that I use primarily in my practice is the muscle testing, specifically systems healthcare. So I'm going to give a couple little disclaimers briefly. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. But muscle testing, manual muscle testing, it's a way to neurologically assess the body. It's not energy medicine. I know that there's a lot out there, but it really kind of depends on how you're using it and what you're doing. Muscle testing really should be part of the exam, along with a good history, good thorough exam, lab work if necessary. It's not kind of a one-shot wonder or anything like that. It just helps get more data and kind of narrow down and figure out kind of what's going on. Not all muscle testing techniques are the same. Not all of them can accurately get to the root of issues. And so I want to preface it that way because I've had patients that come in, they say, I've had muscle testing, it didn't work for me and all these different things. There are tons of different ways that people will use muscle testing. And I really mean it when I say they're not all the same. Some of them are not that great, and some of them are really, really good at getting to the bottom of these health issues. And I would strongly argue, and based on my experience and testimonials from patients and so forth, that the systems healthcare technique it's the best of the best. So manual muscle testing, it's a learn and train skill. It's not easy, and it usually takes years to become really proficient in it. The idea of muscle testing, anybody can kind of go and kind of mess around with it and so forth, but to be able to do it and keep it objective and really be able to use it in a way that is scientific is really the key there. So that'll be the point here to finish off the disclaimer, because we gotta keep moving. So manual muscle testing for mold toxicity. So an efficient and accurate technique that utilizes muscle testing can check for mold toxicity. Like I said, I really want to emphasize, number one, what kind of technique is it? Number two, who's doing it, right? The doctor needs to be intelligent and skilled in that work in order for it to be very valuable. So the pros here, though, is it's extremely accurate, and you can check what nutrients will help detox the mold spores. And if there's a mold or fungal infection, you can also find that and figure out what herbs and so forth are needed to help kill that infection. Okay, we'll talk about in part 2 and part 3 the important differences between like detoxing the spores, the mycotoxins, and actually killing the fungus if it starts to grow in your gut. The cons of this is you can't check for the level of mold toxicity. You really are going to want the lab test in that case. So in my practice, patients usually just kind of opt in for whatever's going to help get them better quicker, and helping to get them better and quicker. My main method here is using the technique that I do, systems healthcare. So with this, let me see just real quick what's next. Okay. One of the things that you'll find in part 2 and part 3 of the videos is mold toxicity is obviously it's a nasty issue and can create a ton of massive symptoms. But if you address it very specifically and in the right approach, like we do with this technique, I mean, it's possible to detox and fully reverse mold toxicity within like 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, just like it's extremely, extremely possible to do it, and often sometimes even quicker. So we'll get into those. We'll get into those a little bit more. All right, detoxing mold spores. That's going to be next in mold part 2. Detoxing mold easily, and then in mold part 3, obviously we'll get into don't forget to kill it too, and we'll talk about things there. If you guys have any questions, please reach out. I hope this video and information has been helpful for you. Like I've mentioned, mold and mold toxicity is something I see a lot in practice, and it's something we've had 100% success rate as far as if mold is the issue, identifying it and then helping patients detox and fully heal and cleanse from it. But it requires a very unique approach and a very specific approach. And it also requires a lot of the understanding that I'm kind of sharing in some of these videos. So I hope you found this helpful. Again, reach out if you have any questions. Until next time, we'll see you guys soon. Thanks.